I'm thrilled tonight to have Michael Robinson Chavez presenting. He's actually presenting while he's living in Spain in Valencia. So we're thrilled to have him. With that, Michael, it's all yours.
Thank you, Frank. Thanks very much for having me. Hello, everybody out there. Thank you for taking the time to tune in here. I'm just going to be showing you some photographs that I made in Ukraine. I was at the Washington Post for many years, for 15 years total, in two different tours. And in 2022, I went to Ukraine before the full-scale Russian invasion. I kind of saw what was happening there, the buildup along the border. Certainly, there were a lot of stories to be done in the Donbass region in the east, which was already very restive with the Russian-backed separatist movement that was happening there. So a group of us went over there, and then things got really bad, of course, when the full-scale invasion happened. And I had kind of backed off covering conflict. Once my daughter was born in 2010, I was very selective about what it was I was going to cover. But being a child of the Cold War, having grown up during the Cold War, during the 80s and the Reagan years, and kind of under always the threat of nuclear annihilation, as it were, Eastern Europe and Ukraine and Russia and Soviet Union always had a fascination for me. So I kind of jumped at the chance to go to Ukraine. I had been in other Eastern European countries and have always been fascinated by those relics of the Cold War.
And
And
Michael, just give us a little bit of background, the dilemma, between talking to your wife, should I go, should I not go with the baby and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, Olivia wasn't a baby anymore at that point, but yes, it was something that we talked about because I had, confided to them and told them that, look, I'm going to back off doing these kinds of things. I was still doing some assignments that were a little tricky, but outright conflict, no. Uh, she understood. She's very understanding. We've been married for nearly 20 years, so
Okay.
so we're both very understanding at this point. And it was kind of to explain that how important this was. This was a war brewing in Europe. My wife is from Spain, so being European, she understands that there hadn't been a conflict of this magnitude on the European continent since Bosnia, and that was some time ago. It was 30 years ago, and so it was just very important to me. And I was with the Washington Post at that time. They had a bureau there. They took security seriously. So it wasn't that I was just kind of gallivanting in. Had a lot of experience working in these zones. So they kind of got it. My daughter, she was 12 at the time when I went, so a little less so. She was a little bit more worried, but she kind of always understood my fascination with the region. And and granted, this is a conflict like no other, right? I mean, it's the closest I can draw a comparison to is kind of, obviously we weren't there, but World War One, where there were all these new advances in technology and mechanized warfare going up
Mm.
against infantry, and it was horrific. And so now, I mean, then it was tanks and armor and mortars and planes and dropping bombs and things like that that were kind of new to the battlefield. And now we're dealing with drones and sophisticated smart weapons, and but the drones in particular are really horrifying for a lot of people. That are living near the front lines and even away from them, because the ranges have increased so much, and they can print them out on 3D printers, and it's an endless assembly line of these horrific machines that are inflicting so much pain. So in 22, I went over Poland. Actually, I was able to fly into Kiev before the war and stayed there, and then we all immediately contracted COVID. So that wasn't very good. The whole bureau came down with COVID. So I caught COVID in Kiev, spent a week just kind of healing up and really hoping that the invasion wouldn't start while I had COVID. That would have been really tough. And then things started happening, and we all know what the result was. And now we're 3 years into this full scale invasion, and sadly, a lot of eyes have been taken off of Ukraine. Certainly with the news cycle the way it is right now, and all the madness that's happening in the U.S. that is kind of rippling out into the rest of the world. It's really hard for people to stay focused on Ukraine, and only now, when horrific acts happen, like the bombing in Sumy and places like that, do eyes suddenly get back onto what has been this brutal war of attrition. So in 22, what you're looking at here, I guess I can just talk through some of
Yeah.
the photos here really quickly. This is an overview of Odessa. This was when Odessa was first hit in 22 of March of 22. This would have been, um, and is when they struck a gas depot early on a Sunday morning in Odessa. People weren't sure what was going to happen with Odessa because the city has such a strong cultural and artistic connection, right, to the rest of Russia, intellectually, culturally, musically. Its history is so intertwined. The Orthodox cathedral that is in Odessa that had been built so long ago, Stalin came and destroyed that, and then they rebuilt it, and now Putin has destroyed it. So it has been this kind of really tough relationship. So people weren't sure if they were really going to hit the Odessa area. And the question's been answered now. The center of the city hasn't been hit as hard as places like Kharkiv and Dnipro and things like that, but they are hitting at a lot of the infrastructure. So this is looking out towards the gas facilities that they had bombed early on a Sunday morning, and I went up to the roof of this building to kind of get an overall picture of what this looked like after it woke us up. And Odessa, and I know there's probably quite a few people watching this that either live in Ukraine or have worked there. Odessa is certainly one of the most fascinating cities I've ever been to, and that's something. You going to Ukraine for the first time. This was the first time I went in 22. Was such an eye opener. The beauty of the country, the people. I always knew that it was going to be sophisticated and highly intellectual, given the education that was a priority for so many people over the years. But it was a real surprise. I mean, you have Lviv, which was part of the Polish Empire, and it shows with its beauty and all the money poured into its architecture. And then Odessa just it really blew me away. It was also fascinating because the first mayor of Odessa was Spanish. It's from Spain. So it's just this incredible crossroads, right? You just learn all these
Yeah.
great things. So then the first place we went to was out in the east, and this is an area that is no longer under Ukrainian control. The Russians have occupied this since the beginning of the invasion, and this is right on the line where the Russian-controlled separatists, the buffer zone between them, towards the southeast of the country. And we had embedded with some Ukrainian troops. This is Vanya, you see on the left, jumping out of the back to go on patrol. And they only went by their first name for security purposes. And it was really interesting talking to him. He did some training in the U.S. Militarily, and now I follow him on Instagram, so I know that he's still okay. So that's reassuring. But this was an area that it was February, so it was really, really cold, and they would dig these positions. And you'll see one later on, and I can talk about some of the interesting stories they told me about these positions they were in. But this is kind of jumping over to Lviv after the war has started, and a mother mourning the loss of her son. And in Lviv, there's a big cemetery that's kind of the veterans cemetery, one of the most important in the country. And so a lot of families want their loved ones buried there in Lviv,
Sort of like our
because
Arlington, right?
correct, very much like Arlington National Cemetery. And sadly, it is expanding at a rapid rate. They're obviously having to dig whole new areas to make room for the thousands of casualties that are coming in. And so this was just outside the church in Lviv, and there were a lot of funerals going on there. And the city had swelled the population because everyone was fleeing the east and ended up in Lviv, and the locals were complaining because the traffic was getting so bad. But of course, they were opening up homes and recreation centers to house everybody that was coming over.
And
So
how many people from the post are you with while you're on this trip?
okay, so this on this trip, the initial one, I went over with Whitney Shefty from the video section. She's a marvelous videographer, and we traveled together. And then Isabel, who was the bureau chief at the time, she was there, and she had a tough task because she was opening up the bureau and reporting at the same time, which is no easy feat. And so there were three of us there at that time, and of course we had wonderful local producers helping us. Sergei Morinov, a brilliant photographer, and someone that it was really great to work with Sergei because not only did we have our love of photography, but he was so well versed in Cold War history and the history of
Mhm.
Ukraine that it was fascinating to talk to him, because you always want to get that backstory, right? You want to know about the history because it will only help you in your photography and getting to that deeper level with your photographs, right? Things that to your eye may not be that important, but once you know something about the history, it takes on new meaning and can really, push visually the story to another level. So it was a really, really great crew, and that was really important, right? When you're working in these zones, that you have good, reliable people that you're working with that you can count on, and that was the case here. And then this was when they did a junket. The Zelensky administration got all the journalists together, and they flew us out to the border zone with the separatist area, the Russian-backed separatist area. And this was kind of an old warehouse. They were housing an armored vehicle inside, and they started lobbing shells over at us. So we were coming under attack here, and this is one of the guys who was leading us there, and he's like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have brought you all here because these shells started coming in, and it was a big junket." So I ran into a bunch of people. I
Oh,
ran
so how
into
many
Lindsay
people?
Dario and all.
Oh, is that, yeah? How many photographers in this junket? What does the junket look
So
like?
here, well, yeah, so that's a good question. So here, this was about, they took us in two old Russian planes, Soviet era planes over there out of the airport. And I can't remember the type of plane. And I apologize to you aviation fanatics out there. I can't tell you what plane it was, but there were about 35, 40 of us, I'd say, maybe more, maybe 50.
Wow.
And as soon as the shelling started, we got broken up into all these different groups. Everybody was separated. It was chaos. It was very chaotic. And our group kind of got pinned in here. And then we were driving out, and I was driving along with the New York Times correspondent, Steve Hendricks, who was a reporter with the Post, who was with me. And and we were following Lindsay Adaria, who was in the car in front of us. And so Lindsay's driver was kind of going slow because he wanted to avoid these potholes, and there were shells coming in. And so as we're coming out, the correspondent for the New York Times was recording this for the Daily, for the podcast. And of course, words were spoken in the car like, "Oh man, oh," and because it was pretty intense, or shells were falling pretty close. And later she took me aside, and she told me, she said, "Michael, I just want to congratulate you on getting the first F bomb on the Daily." So I was just like, "Hey, great." So I have that dubious distinction, but this was a real sign that things were getting even more touchy along this border zone. And we took shelter in a bar, and from there, everyone was kind of in it and had been sandbagged and everything. And then we managed to get out, and it was only a couple of days later that the full-scale invasion started. One of the stories that I worked on with Isabel Kashudian, who was the bureau chief. She was there for 3 years, phenomenal reporter. Was some of these villages north of Mykolaiv that the Russians had occupied, and it was a fascinating story because the Russians had occupied these places, and the majority of the soldiers, the locals were telling us this, the majority of the soldiers were Chechen, and they were lost. They had no idea where they were. So they had occupied these villages. There was a lot of arguing going on because many of the Ukrainians obviously speak Russian from so many years under Russian occupation and part of the Soviet Empire. And so they could listen to them, and they were arguing about which way they were going to go, how they were going to get out, because the counteroffensive had begun and the Ukrainian troops drove them out of here. But we did a story that before they left, there were quite a few atrocities that happened,
Wow.
assaults, sexual assaults. A couple people were murdered, shot to death, beaten up pretty badly, questioned. And so this woman here was showing us her home, and her whole family had to hide for about, I think it was about 7 days. They were hiding in a basement as the town was getting hit, and they were dropping parachute bombs. So they would just send these bombs out on parachutes that would just kind of land randomly. It was like the opposite of a smart bomb. So that was some of the destruction you saw
So,
there.
so
So
those atrocities from Ukrainian soldiers
no,
to,
Russian soldiers on Ukrainians.
okay, the Chesnys. Okay, great.
Yeah, so the Chechens were fighting for the Russians. And remember, the Russians for conscription did a lot of that, right? They brought in
Yeah.
soldiers from the Central Asian areas, from the Far East. You know, it wasn't people from Moscow, it wasn't people from St.
Right.
Petersburg fighting. It was definitely, you know, they go deep into, you know, impoverished areas, much like what the United States does with the draft, right? You know, just they're the ones on the front lines fighting and dying. So so that's where they were, and so that they were driven out, and then they ended up going down to Kherson, which Kherson is still a city of contention in the south. And then this, I really liked this scene because this was a house, just a private home that had been turned into a canteen, a mess hall for the
Mhm.
soldiers. And this is right before the invasion started. So this is right up in the zone with the separatists. And you just go in there and get your meal, you know, your borscht or your pasta or what have you, sala. You get your meals here. And I just loved it because it was someone's house and they just turned it into a mess hall, and it was they had these drawings from the local kids in the town that they put on the wall, and it was pretty great. I really liked this little moment here.
That is pretty intense, huh? Right? Your home becomes something else, and it feels
Yeah.
natural.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, Ukraine just for generations has been this battleground, right? It's been always been in the crossroads. It's, you know, everybody's gone through there and fought, whether you go back to the Mongol horde or whomever. I mean, everybody's fought on the soil of Ukraine in that part of the world. So it's just an area that has been through so much. Um, in October, I went back. This past October, I was on a trip for National Public Radio, and we were doing a story about the coal corridor, Pokrovsk to Pavlograd, and that area was just getting hit really hard because the Russians wanted to really cut off the power supply, right? Especially before winter, they want to really hit all sources of energy. So people freeze during the winter, and it's hard to get fuel, it's hard to get heating, it's hard to get cooking oil, cooking coal, all that kind of stuff. So in this mine we went into, and there were still some men working there, but part of the story was how women were starting to work more in the coal mines,
Mm.
because a lot of the men had been conscripted, a lot of them were dead, a lot of them were wounded, a lot of them were fighting. So they had to keep it going. And the mine in Pokrovsk had become almost too dangerous to mine in. It was getting really difficult to pull the coal out of there. So places like Pavlorad and Tranivka were having to step it up a bit. So we went into a mine there, and it was pretty fascinating to go down there and see what they're doing every day. You know, to keep it going. They have to go 24 hours a day down there.
And no
So
fear
I'm
for
sorry
you,
to be
Mike? No fear for you
in
to go
the.
down deep into a mine?
No, I mean that mine was. I mean they're pretty professional there. The mine
Yeah,
is
no, I
in
don't
really
doubt
good
that. I'm
shape,
just,
and
yeah,
yeah, and
I don't
it
doubt
wasn't
that they're
getting.
professional. It just, I'm thinking I wouldn't go down in a
Uh,
mine.
I mean, it was pretty. It's always a little scary, you know, but it was sort of like being in an underground bunker, so you almost
Yeah.
feel a little safer down there than on the surface. The surface might be a little more dangerous. And I've done a lot of work in coal mines and
Oh,
gold
yeah.
mines and all different places all over the world, and so I felt pretty comfortable in this one. There's other ones though that I felt a lot more fear. That were a lot scarier and definitely not the safest places. Getting back to the embed with the Ukrainian soldiers, this was pretty great that she was getting a Valkyrie tattooed on her arm. And this is before the war, right beforehand. This is that same area where we were in the east, and we stayed with them in the dorm, and it was pretty great. They put up all these little lights, and they were cranking some heavy metal music, and it was pretty fun and interesting to see. And you know, and quite a few of them speak decent enough English for me because my Ukrainian is horrific. So I was able to communicate a bit with them and hear some of the stories they were saying. And then Sergey, of course, helped us with translations, but it was really good to talk with them. And he was the local tattoo artist, and he was pretty good, really pretty good. I think he maybe he'll open a studio when all of this ends.
Okay.
That's looking out towards the separatist controlled area. The Russian backed separatists are in those buildings on the other side of the trench that you see there. And this is looking out from a bunker, a Ukrainian army bunker across the way there. So now you see these trenches, and it's all very muddy at this time of year, right? It's either frozen or muddy. So it was kind of like a combination of the two because the winter wasn't super cold on the days that we were there. So the ground was still pretty soft, but it's cold enough that the men and the women, when they're in the bunkhouses, all the mice there will crawl into their sleeping bags and between their arms and their
Mm.
legs and everything to find warmth. And we're
Wow.
talking like hundreds of mice that just come, country mice, to seek warmth. And we humans are pretty warm, so they come to us. So there was a lot of cats. There were a lot of cats roaming about because a lot of them want the cats around to try to keep the mice population down. Because not everyone's feeling so generous with their body heat that they want a bunch of mice sleeping with them overnight. So it was pretty.
Wow.
There were a lot of stories like that you would never think about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is what I'm talking about. Now, see, when you talk about World War One,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not just the mechanized warfare, but these trenches, like, it's Eastern Europe, or it's trench warfare. It just was like nothing I had seen. And, in the Middle East, I didn't see things like this, or in Congo, or in other conflicts that I've covered. And so this was kind of a real shock. And you had to keep reminding yourself that, that this again, like Bosnia was so awful because no one was doing anything about it. It was just another case of like Rwanda, the genocide in Rwanda. Like, who's going to come to the aid here? Who's going to do it? And no one ever did it. No one ever went down. And we all saw what happened in Rwanda. Then it repeated itself in Bosnia, Srebrenica, and how long it finally took to NATO to act and do something. And in Ukraine, obviously some weapons were being given, but you saw how long it took for the US and other powers to really start supplying weapons to counter a power that had already invaded Georgia, had already annexed Crimea, was already pouring weapons into the separatists in the east of Ukraine, had already obliterated Chechnya. I mean, it was just, it's very frustrating that way. And talking with the Ukrainians, that they express this frustration, and now you hear it in the Baltic countries or Poland, right? Because they're all very scared, they're all very frightened. Because what's to stop him? And now the U.S. is, you know, close to becoming a firm ally of Russia, given where we
Yeah.
are right now politically. So on this last trip with National Public Radio, we actually did a story talking to people in Ukraine about before the election because it was October, and they were all very concerned that if Trump won, what would happen, and all their worst fears and more came true. So going to Mykolaiv now, which is a kind of a breadbasket port area. There's a lot of the Kherson Valley, and down there, it's where the Dnipro River comes down, and it's a really, really fertile area to grow produce and wheat and tomatoes and everything. And it's also has dams and a lot of control about hydroelectric power, and that's why it's really contested. And the Russians are really just
Wow.
hammering Kherson on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Um,
So Michael, just let me one question. As now you're coming back and you're speaking to the locals, the soldiers, is it utter disbelief what's going on in the States from, a Trump perspective? Like, are they asking you why?
I mean, I was speaking with people prior to the election.
Okay.
So, I mean, I'm trying to go back. I'm trying to get a commission to go back to Ukraine. I really want to go back and do more work there. But as you could imagine, it's an expensive place to operate. Uh, but I would be fascinated to hear what they're saying. But obviously, we kind of know what the answer is there
Yeah.
with the dressing down of Zelensky in the Oval Office, the chumminess with Putin. And I think it's the unpredictability. It's that one day the Trump administration is scolding Putin and that we're going to hit you with heavier sanctions, and then the next day, oh, he's doing a good job or what. It's so chaotic
Mm.
that I don't know what people are thinking, and I think a lot of people are fearful that everyone's forgetting about Ukraine, that there's going to be no more money going there. And we saw that's already happened, that the intelligence sharing had stopped, that the pipeline of weapons had stopped. And all that does is embolden Putin, who can now take advantage of that vacuum and really push forward to give himself better positioning should there ever be serious peace talks. But we saw this supposed ceasefire, and what's happened with that? I mean, that's just been
A joke.
non-existent. A joke. That's actually a much better word for it. It's just been a joke. So yeah, people I think are very frustrated, and Ukrainians that I speak with via WhatsApp, and yeah, they're very frustrated. They feel abandoned. Yeah, they feel like we've
Mm.
just been left here our own resolve, and Europe is now stepping it up, but Europe to create a larger budget for defense, and they're doing that. Europe is one thing that this has done is that Europe has realized like we need to be self-sufficient. We need to be on our own. The idea of a European Union is actually stronger now than it was pre-Trump.
Yeah.
Because the Baltic states and certainly Scandinavia were never like, oh, the European Union's so important. Now that's changed. That attitude has changed, and the realization that a lot of the GDP is going to have to go to some military buildup to defend themselves and be more self-sufficient. And I think in the long run, that will be very, very good for Europe as the US isolates itself from the rest of the world. So
And
the
no,
Ukrainians are,
no, I mean, and we can never go back, right? Like, the Europeans could really never go back to just relying on the states, right? This has opened up a
yeah, I
whole
don't, yeah, I
enlightenment.
mean, exactly, and I don't think they should. And it's interesting because a lot of people say, oh, Europe it's their fault for being so reliant on the U.S. But NATO was set up that way, right? Yeah, I mean, NATO was set up that the U.S. is the dominant force. You know, we're the number one in terms of financing NATO. We make the decisions on NATO. We hold the leadership of NATO. It's our deal, and Europe just kind of follows along, and that dynamic is certainly changing.
As it should.
Yeah, as it should, as it should. So we'll see where Europe goes, and I mean, and now you have the dollar, falling. Uh, the fact that people aren't investing in the U.S. So Ukraine is going to have to look to its European neighbors, I think, more for support. And of course, these are the consequences of the war times 100,000 plus, and it's this gentleman was killed in an administrative building in Mykolaiv that the Russians bombed at about 9 a.m. to assure maximum casualties, and it was a mixed it was a political bill. It was an administrative building for the city of Mykolaiv. Were there military elements there? Yes, most likely. Not you know frontline military elements, but you know logistics or what have you. But it was the administrative center for the city of Mykolaiv. So he had died in that explosion. I think it killed about 36 people that morning.
Mm.
And this is in Pavlorad in that coal corridor I was talking about. And this is people now in Pokrovsk that were holding out. They were saying, we're going to stay here, we're going to stay here. And speaking with people, they said that it's madness to stay now. It's so loud, it's constant shelling, drones that they'll look out their window and just see the drones going through the street. Some of them are reconnaissance drones, others are designed to take targets out. So they started leaving and taking whatever means of transportation they could get to Pavlorad. And then in Pavlorad, they would spend the night, and some would stay there in the displaced persons area, and then others would board the train to get to Dnipro or further west. And if they were lucky, they had relatives outside the country that they could get to and stay there. Here in Valencia, for example, my daughter goes to school with students that her friends that they fled the war. They fled in 2022 and were lucky enough to come down here. They had some connection, family connection or whatever, and they're friends now in school. So you really feel the all the just diaspora all throughout Europe. Even I was teaching a workshop in Bali, and there were quite a few Ukrainians in Bali as well that they
Yeah.
had fled and gone out there.
So give us a little bit of insight into Olivia, how she's feeling now with you going.
Um, the little she's like she's grown up quite a bit. She's pretty sharp and pretty savvy, and geopolitically in the world. I mean, she's not happy. She I check in regularly, but like on this last trip with NPR, I made a point like I wasn't going to the front lines. I wasn't going up there and getting the howitzer going off or getting that. I'll leave that to Tyler, Tyler Hicks from the New
Yeah.
York Times, who
Yeah.
I mean it's just he's extraordinary stuff, just amazing, amazing work. He had a story not too long ago where he was going forward with these guys and they got to one base that the Ukrainians had just hit, and the Russians were all dead in there, and their coffee was still hot. Stuff like that. It's just like it was really powerful stuff. And so I'm really happy that he's doing that, and he better stay safe. But yeah, for me, I just don't really, that's not what I'm there to cover anymore. I
Right.
really am fascinated by obviously everything that's happening to everyone in Ukraine. And so this was a perfect example of doing that. So Olivia's pretty calm with this. She's pretty happy with that. Like, don't be on the front lines. um, but the thing about Ukraine is that everywhere can be the front lines, right?
Yeah. At
But
any moment, yeah.
at any moment, but you do get some warnings. You travel with a security advisor now, at least, many larger institutions do. So NPR, I traveled with a old, he was a Australian Army, great guy. Really, really felt, comfortable traveling with him. Always an asset, never got in the way or told me what I couldn't do, which was this balancing act, right? Now that journalists working with security people are having to find. And he would give us warning. He would say like, "Hey, there's some cabs, these types of munitions and missiles and rockets coming in," and you would get, depending on where you are, like in Kharkiv, you don't have much time, right? Because you're really close to the front line. Odessa, you get quite a bit more time. Dnipro, you get more time because they have to travel further from their Black Sea launch pads or from eastern Ukraine. So you get these warnings that you have a few minutes. So it's like, hey, go get to a bomb shelter. You kind of know where the shelters are. The air raid sirens are pretty constant. And Ukrainians at this point will be going out to dinner in Odessa. We're at this really nice restaurant. Air raid sirens are going off in the background, and people are still enjoying their meal. And we kind of strategically chose our restaurant not based on cuisine, but based on, oh, they have a great basement in there, or they have a
Was that
place that we
right?
can get, yeah, like we can get to and get some shelter while, and still get something to eat. And the Ukrainians, I have huge admiration for the Ukrainians and what they're going through and how they've responded to it. Um, but yeah, so thankfully she's a little easier with that, and so hopefully when I go back, it'll be the same thing. I'm not going back to get right onto the front, and because it's a weird front, right? It's not like small arms fire at the front. It's people with small arms. If they're at the front, they're being hunted down by drones and just being taken out. It's insane. It's like the Terminator. It's really wild, and you can watch it. There's all those horrible videos from the drone's perspective of hunting people down. And so it's a totally different type of scene as far as coverage is concerned.
Okay. Mhm.
This is in Dobropilia, which is a coal town, another coal town. This one's right next to Pokrovsk, so it's pretty close to where the Russian front is, and it's been getting hit a lot. And this was a dorm area that got smashed, and running water is hard to find in a lot of places, so they have these central spigots that people go to get water. So this woman was there filling up her water bottles to take back home, and always wary. And actually, while we were there, Dobropilia started getting hit on a pretty regular basis because they were trying to drive. They want to drive the civilians out. So they want to terrorize people to the point where they're all leaving, and then there's just some military left over, and then it makes the job of the drones and all this stuff easier. So that's kind of what the strategy was while we were there, and I think it still is holding that way.
Yeah, and Michael, can you tell the difference between, like, if you look at that building, can you tell if that was a drone hit or a bomb hit, or is there a sign that you can see?
Yeah, so I am not that literate in that. I was learning, but Adam, our security guy, he certainly could tell us. So he was telling us that they call them cabs, and I feel bad because I don't remember what the acronym exactly means, what it stands for.
Oh, Boston at 3740.
Hey, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, now here. You
Yeah.
blacked out for
Oh,
a
there you are.
second.
Okay. I lost you for a second. Here, hold on one
Yeah.
second. I'm going to share the screen again.
Okay. Well, do I have to do that again? No, no. I think you can do
No,
it.
I don't. No, I think I'm still on. Let me see
Yeah.
here.
Okay.
Hold on one second. Let me go from
Yeah, there you
here to here. Yeah. All right, can you see it again, the picture?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right,
I see your
good.
deck.
Hopefully we won't have another oh, you
Yeah,
see
I
okay,
see
you
your
see the
grid.
building and oh, you see the grid. You don't see the all
Right.
right, hold on a second.
Okay, now we're at your lady, and we were
Is
at
she
the
on there
slide.
now?
No, no, now I see your grid again.
Okay, hold on one second. I think I'm just
Yeah.
delayed a second.
Okay.
She should be popping up now. Can you see her now?
No, I still see your grid with your drop down slideshow settings. Now I see her.
Okay, all right. Yeah, it's just moving a little slow.
Okay.
Um, uh, so I can't really tell. Obviously you can tell if it's been a mortar or an artillery hit because it's smaller. You can see the initial point of impact and the spread. So this was a much larger attack. This
Right.
was a missile attack. I mean, this might have been a cab. It's a smart guided bomb
Mm,
that goes in. So a lot of times they'll put the device, the homing device, for lack of a better term, the guiding device onto an older bomb and then send those in. And they've been using those a lot in Kharkiv and certainly in this area. But there were two buildings next to each other, twin buildings like this, that were former dormitories. They were dormitories and then they got hit. Okay, has the picture changed or is it still the bombing picture?
we still have our lady getting water.
Okay, yeah, so it's running a little bit behind. So I'll
Let's
wait because
see.
the next picture coming up is speaks to the prisoners of war and the missing.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me know if you see it now.
Not yet. Now we go. Now
Not
we got
yet. Okay. All right. So this is something that happens every weekend throughout Ukraine, that the family members go out onto the streets and they bring these banners showing the missing, the prisoners of war. Most of them are just missing. Some are feared dead. Others, they don't have any idea. Some are prisoners and they're hoping to do some kind of exchange and they just want to keep awareness up. They just don't want people to forget about them. So they bring them out onto the street, and this is in one of the coal towns as well. This was just I made this also in the last trip.
And how do they determine? How do they find out that my son, my husband, is a prisoner
Usually
person?
there will be an exchange, right? They'll have the information. I believe it would be the information ministries. Will inquire. There'll be dialogue between the two sides about who is a prisoner and who isn't. How they do that, I'm not sure, and
Mm,
why they do it. I mean, the motivation could be just like, oh yeah, we have all these people prisoner just to put the population into anguish, right? To make them suffer, as it were. So that I'm not positive actually as to how what the channels of communication are on that.
yeah, I mean it's
But they have
interesting.
done prisoner exchanges.
Yeah, that I know. It's just interesting. It's sort of like this civilized thing in the middle of the hell that is war.
Yeah, that's totally uncivilized. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's sort of like still ceding to some kind of code when, Putin really has no code. The guy he
Yeah.
is just so ruthless.
Yeah.
And what the Kremlin is doing. So, what do you see a picture now of an elderly woman being helped? She's lying on the floor.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay, so this was at a hospital in Mykolaiv, and when I showed you the previous picture of the gentleman's funeral that he was in the administrative building that got hit, this is when they targeted a hospital with cluster munitions, and they hit the area right outside of it. And I think there were two or three fatalities here, and then there was an adjacent marketplace down the way, and 10 people died there, and they hit that marketplace during the day when it would be busiest. So that's what I'm talking about, like these, just terrorizing the population.
Yeah.
There's civilian targets. There's nothing military about any of these locations, and so these are patients from the ward upstairs that they had brought down into the basement to treat them in the basement
Mm.
because it was just much too dangerous. Shattered glass everywhere. It was really dangerous to be up top. So they brought them downstairs, and this poor woman was completely terrified, and they were trying to comfort her as best as they could in the basement of this hospital. So that you've seen that a lot, right? On the news that apartment buildings, hospitals, schools
Yeah.
getting hit, and when you go over there and look at it, you see it. And you saw Zelensky just made a powerful speech where he was inviting Trump to come see the destruction firsthand, right? It's just like,
Yeah,
why don't you come out here and see it?
yeah. Right. Biden
So
made a
this,
right, during his
yeah,
administration.
yeah. So do you see a dog now on the screen?
Yep, yep, in the front
All
for
right, good. So I have a thing where I try to get an animal in every photo story I do, in every picture story I do. Big animal lover. Animals suffer a lot through these things too, for sure. And one thing, that I really loved about Ukrainians too, is that they treat the
unbelievable,
dogs and cats and the animals so well. They're so, it says a lot about people, right? And how they treat animals.
unbelievable.
And the Ukrainians like flying colors. They're wonderful. And so this, right, you're seeing here is one of those villages we talked about earlier where the Chechens had gone in, the Chechen military under the Russian flag had gone in and had committed some atrocities. And this is the result of a parachute bomb. So this home was destroyed by a bomb that just came floating down, boom, hit it and took it out. And this was a stray dog that had a collar. We don't know where the owner was or what happened to the family or anything like that. But there were quite a few roaming around here. But I mean, you can see that these bombs are pretty lethal. It's a pretty big place. These are farmhouses, so they're pretty good size. They have warehouse area, storage area for feed and grain and what have you, and tractors and the such. And it just took this whole thing out. I mean, these are pretty big bombs and left a pretty good sized crater. That's a crater you can see behind the dog there.
Yeah.
So let me know when the picture changes so
No,
I can
you
go
get
into it.
yeah. Now
I
we're
was
in a basketball court there.
Okay, so this is what I was talking about in Lviv, which is in the far west of the country. It's the largest city in the western part, and you have the Carpathian Mountains to the south, which I still haven't been to, and every Ukrainian tells me you have to go to the Carpathian Mountains. It's probably the most beautiful place in the whole country. So I got to get there at some point. And then in Lviv, which is the city is stunningly beautiful. It is a really, I was so surprised at just how beautiful the architecture is. And this is a basketball court at the sports center, the community sports area that has been turned into a displaced persons camp. So this one was made in 2022. I believe it is still housing displaced people. And so these were families, and I met about four of the families here, and all of them were from the east, mainly from Donbass, the Donbass region, Kramatorsk, in that area in there, which a lot of people have left. A lot of families have left that area because it's just relentlessly under attack. And some of it got taken back in the counteroffensive, and so families have gone back. But a lot of these families are from areas that, even if there's some kind of peace talk or peace negotiation, getting those lands back is going to be a tall order. I just
And
don't
what is
see.
the land? What does the land look like?
And what does the land look like, right? We went to, and I don't have a picture in this take, but we did go to one village outside of Kharkiv that was occupied by the Russians for a while. Then in the fall of 22, the Ukrainians did a counteroffensive and took it back, but there was a ton of fighting there. And then later on, like in 23, some people started trickling back, and there's only 63 people living in this village right now, and it is mined all around it. I mean, it's
Wow.
mines everywhere. So the NGOs that come in for demining operations, they just tape and red triangles up everywhere. So you really, what are you going to do there? You can't farm because the farmland is littered with mines, and so are these places ever going to be inhabitable again? I mean, maybe once you get rid of all the mines, some parts of it will be, but people
Yeah,
are really afraid to go there.
yeah. You really have to imagine that, with all these new technologies, we have AI and everything else. Hopefully there's something that some computer wizard can develop something that we can see the minds instantaneously, see them easily,
That
and
would be, yeah, that
I
would be
mean
pretty
that
fantastic.
that technology has got to be in the works somewhere, you
And
know.
then now they make them with the hard plastics, right? That have no metal, they have no alloy, nothing in them, so they're really tough to detect.
Right.
And they make smaller ones. There's anti-personnel, and then I can't blast mines, I think they call them, that are just designed to
Amputate.
blow off a leg or a foot, because then in the field of battle, you have at least one soldier is taken out because of the mine itself, and then another soldier is taken out of the combat because they have to help the other person. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the design, and then of course it demoralizes everybody. So
The
ugh, it's just yeah, it's awful stuff.
warfare is so fucked. It
Yeah,
just,
it's just
we were just in Vietnam, um, and some of those the things that they had, these booby traps, were really designed to exactly to do what you just said, to
yeah,
demoralize, you know, and to just spook all the other soldiers. Like everywhere you step, there could be something,
yeah,
and
that
what,
you don't want to move forward, right?
right? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
That's warfare.
So yeah, it's just really some horrific stuff going on. I mean, all in every theater of war, right? I mean, look at Sudan; it's just atrocious. So a lot of these families, I did not go back this time, but it is still there. But I don't know whether some of these families have moved on to relatives. Hopefully, they have because this was a very temporary existence here.
Yeah.
And this is also, do you see a picture right now of a bread line?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. All right, so this is a where they're giving out bread at a church in Lviv. So Lviv became sort of a humanitarian center, especially in the early days of the war when everybody fled there. So everyone was just kind of lining up and getting these handouts of bread, and you can just kind of see on their faces, right, that a lot of hardship, and some of these people are old enough to know the Soviet era and how difficult that was. I mean, this is a country that's been through human-induced famine, Stalin's famine of the 1930s and World War II, and it's just like if any country deserves a break, it's Ukraine. They really, really deserve a break, and they're not getting it. So, but yeah, so this is kind of what Lviv has become. And this last trip, I went into Lviv, and it's thriving too. The restaurants are open, people are spending money, the plaza's filled with young people. It's got a lot of life. There's a gorgeous opera house. There's theater. There's culture. There's a lot of things going on that the Ukrainians will not be, you know, put
They
into
will not pay.
shelters to live. They will, yeah, they're gonna live their lives, and a lot of foreign voices, NGOs, journalists, what have you, going through there. But it's a pretty fascinating place. And the access is still through Lviv to get in. So you fly to Krakow or Warsaw or what have you. You can go in through Romania too if you wanted to go into Odessa in the south. Or I don't know what the Slovak border crossing is like, but from Poland, and then you just get a train or a bus you can take to Kiev. There's buses that go Berlin nonstop to Kiev. They just go through Prague, different places. So it's a nice train going across. It's really nice. It's great.
I mean,
So
the whole thing has got to be intensely an intense experience for your brain, right? To come to,
yeah,
there's the opera, there's the food, there's bombing, there's dead bodies. I mean, what a mental
yeah. It's just very, very strange that way. And this might be the last frame. This is
Hmm.
evacuees. So this was in Mykolaiv as well. And then this is when Mykolaiv was getting hit quite a bit. As I told you, the hospital getting hit, the marketplace,
Right.
all that was getting struck. So people had it, and especially in the villages around Mykolaiv, because Kherson was occupied at this time. The Russians were in Kherson. They were sending rockets over, missiles. There was footage of, I think, CNN, maybe it was Ben Wiedemann. I can't remember who it was. I think it was Ben, that CNN was in the south towards Kherson, and their car got blown up. The Russians blew up their car because they got too close, and they had to run out, and then artillery shell came in and blew their car up. So the Russian line was very close to Mykolaiv at this time, and so there was a steady flow of people, and they were boarding buses to Odessa, and then from Odessa they would scatter to wherever it is that they were going. But it was some pretty big lineups of people going, and she was saying goodbye to her grandson, the woman on the right there.
Yes. So, Michael, just give me I'm trying to understand the reflections here. So the lady we see up on top, she's in the bus?
That's correct. So the woman here is in the bus on the right side of the frame
Yeah.
that you see with the hat on. She's in the
Right.
bus looking out at everybody lined up waiting to get on buses.
Okay, so the lower
So I'm
folks are,
standing, yes, they're all waiting to get on. And then if you look at the bottom center of the frame, you see the profile of a young boy. He's
yes,
also on the bus.
on the
So
bus.
he's inside the bus and everybody else is waiting to get in and get evacuated.
Yeah, a
So
story
it
within a story, my God.
Yeah, I just, all these faces because that's, I mean,
Incredible.
that's where it is, right? It's in the
Yeah.
eyes and everything. And I know that, Instagram has kind of brought this tendency to make more graphic and compositional images. But, when we go into places like this, it is our responsibility to really take people to where they can really not go, where most everybody is not going, and show us what people are going through. And the eyes and the faces are obviously where that is.
Mm.
So, and I think yeah, that was the last one.
Okay, so you could stop sharing. So, how do you, Michael? I mean, you have Olivia, you have your wife, right? How do you go and what do you do for yourself when you go back to get yourself right? I mean, because you're seeing a lot of stuff, you're witnessing, and from listening to you, it runs through your heart and your brain. You can tell that. What do you do to make sure that you're okay?
I mean, it's a good question. I've been doing this for quite some time, and there were times when I wasn't okay covering this stuff back in the
Mm.
day, Iraq and Middle East, and I mean, I did that for so many years. I mean, I had different things I would do. Having grown up in Southern California after Iraq and a lot of the Middle East campaigns, Lebanon and things like that, I would fly to Indonesia and I would go surf. I would go on a boat off of Sumatra and go surf these beautiful islands there. And at the
For that
time, there
reason,
weren't many people around. For
for
that reason, I just unplugged. It was
your
quiet,
therapy.
beautiful, natural. It was pure therapy. It was wonderful to do, and it's a place I still love, and it's very important to me for those reasons. But something like Ukraine, fortunately in Ukraine, the theaters, it's pretty big, and you hook up with your friends there, you meet with them and talk to them and share meals, and that really helps. And then you go out, and then maybe some people will travel in Europe, although they'll have their places that they go to just seek solace, go be with family. So for me, after this trip, and I wasn't doing frontline stuff, so this last Ukraine trip wasn't that it was so harrowing, and it was awful because of the stories you hear and the people you meet and some of the places you go for sure. But then just to come back here and be in Spain, and it's very relaxed and very calm. And now, I mean, for photographers based in the US that are going and covering some of this stuff and then go back to the US, they might find it harder to find that peace of mind,
Yeah,
given where the US is these days. So
right.
they might, think about it. But people would go into all different places. People have different methods of doing it, but it's
Yeah,
important you do it. And it's important you recognize that you need to do it, that you
right.
need to talk to someone, to go somewhere, to unplug, and get right. That's very crucial. And not burn
And,
out, because if you do this work relentlessly, you burn out real quick.
yeah, yeah. And do you have your antennas up for a colleague who's not doing so well? Like you can tell that, right? Like this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, yes, that's a really good question. It's, because this was such a taboo subject. Remember, for so long, it was kind
Yeah,
of like, oh, we're not fighting, we're just there observing, and it doesn't
yeah,
affect us because we can leave at any time, and we're just covering it. And that was all just a bunch of crap, right? That's not the case at
yeah.
all. Is that you are affected by this severely because you're focusing in on it. You're like zooming in on it, and you're trying to get it
And you're
over and over
looking
and over
for it.
again. You're looking for it, and then you're editing it, and you're hearing it, everything. So yeah, if you see a colleague not doing well, then even if they're your friend and you care about them and respect them or whatever, then I mean, I would have no qualms about calling them out on something and just saying like, hey, have you thought about this or thought about that, or how are you really feeling right now? How much longer are you going to be here? That kind
Right.
of thing. Why don't you take a break? Even spending a couple of days in Kyiv is a nice break.
Right. Yeah, I think someone was saying when you start to notice people taking too many risks, that's sort of a sign, that
Yeah.
you're a little bit too comfortable
And
or do
and it's
something.
but it's hard to figure that one out too, right? Because
Yeah,
people have different thresholds of risk, right? So, there's been situations I've gone to with colleagues that they have a higher threshold for that than I do, that they're willing to go that extra 10 yards into the zone that I would not, that I just don't have a good feeling about. And in that sense, it's all about your instinct and your gut and what you want to do. Make sure, of course, that you're not alone and stuff, and that everybody's on the same page going in. But I would never, like, for example, that's a tough one to balance because would it be my place to say like, hey, I think you're taking too many risks based on my criteria when their criteria is different, and they've been operating that way for years successfully and doing good stuff, but you just never know, and unfortunately, we've lost friends and good people.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
when's the next trip in for you, Michael?
As soon as someone wants to hire me to go in,
Yeah.
I'll go.
All right.
I'm hoping to go back in for NPR. Of course, it's all budgetary stuff,
Right.
or even for the Post to go back in for the Washington Post again. But yeah, I'm game to go in anytime. I just think it's a huge story. It's a massive story. And so much is resting on this, especially now, given the dynamic between the US, Russia, and
Right.
Europe.
And is it really driven by what NPR or the Post or AP, whoever, is getting from their readers? We want more information. Like, what drives the Post to say we got to take a pass this time, or NPR, no one's really interested? Is it just on readership and just on what they're getting from their
I
audience?
wish I wish I could answer that question. It changes all the time, Frank. It's always changing. It's sort of, I've always tried to look wherever I've worked for the path to get the green light, and the path is always different to get the
Mm,
green light based on what desk you're working with, who the editor is, what is their way of doing things. It might be different on the climate desk than on the international desk. I mean, so there's always different routes of getting in. Do I deal with the correspondent or do I go straight through the photo editor? But I have to say, right now, the bottom line is the bottom line. It's budgetary.
yeah,
Do we have the budget right now? Trump is just this black hole that all news is getting sucked into, and demand, whether that be stories related to tariffs. Like right now, that's what it is: tariffs, tariffs, tariffs. Like everybody wants stories related to tariffs. Deportation. I have some pitches that I liked in Latin America that I put forward, and editors like them, but they say we can't get any money for this, or we can't spare the people to do this because it's all about deportations. It's all El Salvador and Panama and Venezuela, and that's Latin America now. The rest of Latin America, it's oh, there's an election in Ecuador. Okay, we'll give that a 1 day story, and we'll just write that from Bogota or from Mexico
right.
City or wherever. So
Yeah.
that's what you're up against.
Yeah, and it must be really frustrating in that the people you're speaking to are totally sympathetic to what you want to do and continue to
Oh,
cover it.
they'd love it. Yeah,
Right.
they want
It's
they want
it,
to do
it's
this
it's the
coverage.
people with the numbers who are only watching the numbers who say, that there's no value in.
Right. And photo editors have it really difficult, right? Because
Yeah.
they're understaffed in so many places. I mean, you have two photo editors that are in charge of the whole world, essentially, and coverage wise. So, they're so overwhelmed. The news cycle is relentless because it's that, Bannon strategy of flooding the zone. And so it's just relentless for them. And so you might have a really great pitch that could be related to tariffs or could be related to deportation, but to get someone to have the time to digest it, talk it over with you, launch you to do it. I mean, it's tough, and everyone wants everything done in a couple of days, 2 or 3
Right.
days.
Yeah, we can't send
So, I mean,
Microsoft.
with NPR, it was great because they got a grant. They had a grant to go cover Ukraine, so it was wonderful, and I got to go for 3 weeks.
Wow.
That's a dream gig. That's a dream assignment, and very rare. I'm hoping it'll happen again, but I'm not holding my breath that it will. But then you're able to dig in. I did 5 stories while I was in Ukraine for them.
Right.
You just really hit it and you work it because you have 3 weeks, so you can
Right.
really take advantage of that.
Mm. Yeah, that's something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's challenging.
yeah, 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 yeah. And
Yeah.
and and the public, loses its interest, and the people who really care are still focused and they want more. So it's like this
Yes.
ongoing fight, right?
I think there's a demand for the news, right? There's people that want to read about this. There's people that want to look at it. It's getting harder, right? Because people are tailoring their tastes to what their opinion is and what they want, and they have their certain venues they go to, and a lot of it's based on the hits that it gets online, and all these, tariff stories or Trump stories or what have you are getting a lot of hits, and then maybe Ukraine isn't so much because people are desensitized or tired of hearing about it.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
So you're waiting for the call. right? Right.
Story of my life now.
Right. The
Yeah.
waiting for the call. Will she call me? That's great.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Michael, I cannot thank you enough for doing this, and you should know this is we're gonna run this Wednesday night. So
Okay.
so
I will share the love,
yeah,
and I really thank you for having me on here. It's great to talk about it, and hopefully some people see it and either get inspired or look into some more stories
yeah,
about it, and go out and do some good work. And
yeah.
congratulations on projections. I mean, this is how many years you've been doing this now?
Yeah, this is I mean, well, this is you're like probably number 70 on just Ukraine.
That's amazing.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
won't stop because it's for all the reasons you speak about and your
yeah,
colleagues, it's just not right and you have to follow it. You just do, you
yeah.
do you get
Well, it's great because you see all the perspectives too, right? Everyone's different perspectives and what they bring to it, and how the local
and the
photographers see it. Which,
stories
for,
change, you know,
yeah,
because we've done like a couple of shows where it's just about taking care of animals. Like
yeah, I
the way
bet.
and or Carol did a great piece
Yeah.
on a rehab center, in
Hmm.
Florida. Like there's always a different story and what
There's so
that
many.
and that's why like the nuances of Olivia is really important. What you're going through personally, with your kid, right? Like how
Yeah.
what she's thinking with her classmates is really compelling.
Well, what she's thinking is certainly not to get into photojournalism. That's for sure.
There you go, good girl,
But yeah,
smart.
exactly. Smart. She's a smart kid. But
Yeah.
um, but yeah. So actually, that's funny you mentioned that because there's a Freedom of Press Day event at her school, and so they're going to have me go in and talk to them, to the students about that.
Oh, that's
So
great.
that'll be
I,
really, really great.
I'll tell you a story. I when my kid was in middle school, middle or early high school, they had a parents' day, and they know that I represent photographers. So would you like to come in and talk? My pleasure. So as it turned out, this is during the Bush administration. The cover of the New York Times had a photograph of American boys coming off the planes in their coffins, right? And
Oh, at Dover?
right. So the plane is, the coffin is coming off, and that's the photograph with the American flag, people looking out the window. So as it turned out, that's the day I'm doing career day at the high school. So I,
Wow.
I bring the it was middle school, my wife tells me. So I bring the cover, and you know how the kids are, they don't give a shit about anything, right? And I said, look at this photograph. I mean, and I said, this photograph is so fucking intense.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a father in there, there's a mother in there, there's a sister, a brother, there's somebody in there with a family. And of course, when you say fuck, everyone lights up, right? Now the kids are listening to you, right? Just
So you dropped it in middle school.
in the middle school, right?
Oh man. Well,
So,
they say it 10, 20 times an hour probably. So
right. But
yeah.
so later that day, the principal of the school calls and goes, Mr. Mio, you're going to tell me that you didn't use the F word in the class today. And you're going to tell me you didn't do that. And I said, Mr. Cahill, I think his name was, I did. And I had to write a letter because the parents were calling that, like
Oh.
it was the whole thing. That's why,
Oh man,
Olivia,
persona non grata at the middle school.
right, I'm still getting calls from the principal
Yeah.
that I have to go and apologize. And I said, whatever you want me to do, Dr. Cahill, I will do it. But
Yeah, but you know what? The power of the photo got across, didn't it?
yeah, yeah. I mean
Yeah.
like because for the kids, it's just a photograph. But like when you stop and think, there's somebody in there that is loved by somebody. It's so
Right.
so
And
important.
what did they go through to end up
Yeah,
there?
all of that. You want
Yeah.
you want to wake them up. Because for them it's like a free day. We get all these knuckleheads coming through, and adults talking about real estate or whatever jobs they have.
I know, just putting them to sleep, right?
Right. I woke them up,
Yeah.
and their
Yeah. It sounds good. Well, yeah, so I'm looking forward to it, but I probably won't drop the F-bomb. I
yeah.
probably
Don't
won't
do
do
that. Don't do that.
that one.
I'm telling
I
you,
don't want
don't.
to write letters, and I don't want
Yeah,
to
you got no
apologize.
time to write letters. That's it.
No time to write letters.
And
But
socially, it's bad for Olivia.
yes, there's that too. There's
Yeah,
that
you got to
too.
watch that.
Yeah, yeah, you
That's
got to be
really important.
careful.
Yes.
Gotta be careful. But no, it'll be fun to do. And honestly,
Yeah.
it's a great history lesson too, because when I come
Yeah.
home and I'm, looking at my work and explaining where I've been and things like that, it's really good for her to hear these things, right? Because
Yeah.
then she gets firsthand accounts of, oh, I was in Nigeria and saw this, and show her videos and what have you. And I was just in India doing a workshop thing, and so I can tell her, oh, in India I saw, this Hindu ritual going on, and they had images of Che Guevara up because it's a big communist area, and it's just
Right.
awesome, right? It's like great
Yeah.
stuff to
And
talk
the world
about.
gets smaller for the kids, and that's good.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yeah,
like we have,
precisely.
well, I thank you a lot, Michael, and be safe. Keep us posted.
Thanks, Frank. I will.
When you have new work, or you have another collection you want to show with any kind of direction, just tell me,
Sure.
because we're going to continue to do this, for unfortunately as long as it takes. So
Yeah. Oh, I
you
hear
always
you.
have.
I will do that. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, you always have a platform. So we'll see you soon. Thank you, Michael. Be
All right,
safe.
Frank. I appreciate it. Thanks. You
Kisses to
too.
Olivia.
Take care.
All right.
Thanks.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye.